I realized pretty quickly, shooting around Dexter, that I was gonna have to get comfortable kind of swearing around him, but he was cool with everything.
I don't like cursing at all, and I only do it because it is my job.
I gotta say, I love this so much, and I'll be honest, I haven't laughed that hard in any behind-the-scenes video since David Benioff revealed that he's a fucking idiot. Welcome, my friends, to Night of the Nine Kingdoms Episode 3 review, and I have to ask off the bat, was anybody out there watching with a casual fan who was surprised by that egg reveal? And they did sprinkle clues here and there, but if you remember from Game of Thrones, there's a phenomenal scene between Arya and Tywin in Season 2, Episode 7, where he has to correct her on how to act like a proper peasant. My lord, or what highborn nobles say, my lord, one word, is what commoners use, and Egg revealed that twice in the first episode.
Oi!
My lord.
Set when you deserve it.
Yes, my lord.
But as a fan of the books, the craziest moment for me was the fortune teller scene and the implications to that. I did ask George R.R. Martin's friend and co-writer, Elio Garcia, about it, and he cleared up some things for me, which I will share with you in the video. But before we get to all that, please be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. You know the drill. Let's get into it. First and foremost, did I like the episode? Yes, I did. And you're going to hear me say this every review video because I personally think the weakest one this season was the premiere, and even then it was still a fine episode, but it feels like every single one afterwards had more meat on the bone to chew on, and this one specifically had that with some much added lore to the world. For example, that joust with Aegon, and the small folk rioting over Aerion's conduct, and then hearing what Raymond Fossaway had to say later on the Targaryens. It's quite clear the entire country is pretty much sick of their bullshit, to the point where they're willing to riot this hard over foul play. On one hand, yeah, it makes sense. The Targaryens have pretty much brought the country to war several times in the 200 years they've been in power, at least at the start of the show. But on the other, the Seven Kingdoms, even before the Targaryens united everyone, they were always at each other's throats, so does it really matter? I guess conflict is inevitable and everyone generally agrees on that, but it's only okay if it's Westerosi killing each other and not random foreigners on Dragonback instigating it. In fact, if it wasn't for the Targaryens uniting everyone, Raymond Fossaway might have been killed by Lionel Baratheon in some battle involving the Dornish Marches, since both kingdoms of the Reach and Stormlands have fought over it for years before the conquest. Another interesting point, possibly a contradiction with this edition, is Baelor, and how everyone supposedly likes him, but also super tense over the family at the same time. You could argue that everyone liking Baelor probably keeps them hopeful for a better king, especially after Aegon IV fucked everything up, but also, the current king, Daeron the Good, he's doing a pretty decent job, so it still feels a little off, kinda? And maybe that's me being a nitpicky lore nerd, but regardless, the small folk and highborn all secretly hating the Targaryens, it's an interesting addition to the show, and it might set up Egg's downfall in the future storyline, which, on that note, we gotta talk about the fortune teller scene. Some people loved it, some hated it, but the general opinion among book fans seems to be that it all but confirms Egg will become some evil character towards the end of his life with the Summerhall tragedy, and the line, "All who know you shall rejoice in your dying," it adds a lot of fuel to that fire. Now, of course, this could mean many things. On one hand, it could mean that everyone who knows him will rejoice, as in his close friends and family members, because he does go off the deep end and they want it to end. On the other, it could mean his vassals are happy he's gone, considering they weren't too keen on his reforms and ideas when he eventually does take over as king. We saw in this episode firsthand how not having dragons barely allows them to hold on to power, as everyone seems to be itching to rebel. We know eventually they do, almost 100 years later with Robert's Rebellion, but that doesn't really go down until 4 great houses unite together. But the Egg becoming evil theory is something I do want to discuss towards the end of the season, because there is one more thing that goes down that will add fuel to this fire, and I don't want to get ahead of myself on that, so be sure to come back for my end of the season review and discussion. And finally, let's talk about the other random inclusion, Plummer and House Ashford's plot to rig the games. I get why they did it, which was to show that Dunk is an honorable person, and also, running a tournament of this size is fucking expensive, but also turning him down and the whole thing, like, I get it. But I feel like we need a more explanation on the rules of the jousting, at least for this one joust tournament. Dunk was ready to fight that day, but then we learned that only knights of high birth and renown can do so on that day. Okay, fine. Why isn't that announced somewhere? Why hasn't the master of the games told anybody this? Where does one go to see the rules? As for the scheme with Plummer, again, I get why he brought it to Dunk, and in order for the scheme to work, he has to ensure that Dunk will challenge someone, and that he would challenge Andrew Ashford so he could take the dive and they all come out on top. But I kind of wish the scene had a bit more to it. Several competitors in this tournament will later become important, like Robin Risling in the beginning, and Humphrey Harding overall. I kind of wish that one of those two overheard Dunk and Plummer talking in the woods, and they see Dunk turn down Plummer, and thus give those characters a reason to show up later when they're needed. Like, I'll talk about this more during the episode 4 review, but in short, I just kind of wish a lot of these added scenes and moments for the last 3 episodes had a bit more to it. And don't get me wrong, I love Lionel Baratheon, and as much as I love him, he steals the show every time he's on screen. He's also not the only character that should have more development given, or at least a bit more screen time given. Again, this is an episode 4 conversation. I'll see you there. And before I forget, no, the dagger that Aerion pulled out towards the very end of the episode is not the cat's paw dagger. Much to my disappointment. But, of course, as always, this is not just my review, it's a conversation, so let's see what you guys had to say. C.S. Paffy says, Pajamas has infected Carhartt's mind with every episode needs to be a cliffhanger bullshit. These episodes are a fine length and feel satisfying for a quick Sunday night watch before bed. See, here's the thing, I agree with you that the episode lengths are fine, and it's a good night watch before bed. Sure. Though, I have noticed other people in the fandom complain that just when they're getting into it, it ends. So they may not agree with us. However, I also know several people who decided to stop watching after episode 2 and are waiting to binge it when it's all done because of how short it all is. The one thing I have to disagree with you on is the cliffhanger thing, because that's pretty much how you get the audience to come back week after week. I remember the first season of Game of Thrones, which is my favorite, and almost every episode had a holy fuck, that was crazy type of moment, right? The first episode pulled you in after Jaime is caught fucking his sister, the queen, while he's Kingsguard, and they throw a kid out of a window. Oh my god. And then episode 2, Bran wakes up from this coma. Oh my god, he's gonna tell on them. And then episode 3 kind of ends, whatever. Ned is just watching Arya train with cereal. Whatever. Episode 4, Catelyn arrests Tyrion. Whoa, that's crazy. Episode 5, Jaime attacks Ned Stark in the streets of King's Landing. Whoa, that's nuts. Like, almost every single episode had this moment where it's like, okay, I can't wait for the next episode. Let's go. And it really does help bring people back. But I do get where you're coming from. It's great that you're enjoying it. I am as well, but those cliffhanger moments do work towards retaining the audience's attention week after week, and I would imagine you want the audience to come back week after week so they can keep making more of these. Next up, Shade of the Lamp says, was that the dagger? No, it wasn't. They've been somewhat teasing it, but I doubt we'll get it this season, or at all. And honestly, I think it's because of George's fight with Ryan Condal that it's possible we won't even have it introduced. Something tells me the dagger might be a Ryan Condal original idea, and George wants nothing to do with him, and so I'm sure Ira Parker has decided to move as far away from anything having to do with House of the Dragon as possible. Keep in mind, the reason I wanted the dagger in the show is because it connects all of it together, but what are you gonna do? Fellow YouTuber Alex the Roynar says, another prophecy left a bitter taste, but I did love seeing the scenes we're familiar with, plus the little bonus of Egg training Thunder. It shows he's picked this up from a decent master of arms. A bit of a nod before the identity reveal. The Egg training stuff, that's a good call out. I didn't think of that. I figured he was closely watching the squires at the end of episode 2's joust, which was last night for them, and decided to emulate them to better help Dunk, but you also have a good point there. As to the prophecy stuff with the fortune teller, I think the prophecy is showrunner Ira Parker's way of telling us his favorite Ice and Fire theory is going to be legit. That's probably what George told him, and he's, sprinkling it in there for the future. It seems like every spin-off showrunner has an idea that they want to plant their flag on, like Honda with the prophecy dagger, and build upon it. I'll need to connect with George's co-writer and friend Elio Garcia later and get his thoughts on this, because he did help George write that section. And on the topic of Elio, I did ask him what he thought of the fortune teller scene, and this is what he had to say. I read that as a standard thing to say to whoever paid her, but was struck with the real fortune-telling with Egg. So, Elio here believes that the Richard than a Lannister thing was just bullshit, but the Egg thing is true. Again, this is something I want to revisit when the season ends, and I'll have him on to discuss it, because he did tell me something in private that I would rather come out of his mouth than mine, but it was quite interesting. And I also asked him, while we're on this topic, if he thinks the Targaryens being hated was something George intended when they wrote The World of Ice and Fire together, and this is what he had to say. Well, remember, the Blackfyre Rebellion was not invented when George wrote the Hedge Knight, so that conflict wasn't in the background. They are in part retrofitting it in, but also they are definitely giving it a much stronger focus. This idea that they are mostly hated by seemingly everyone. By The World of Ice and Fire, no, I never had the impression from George that there was a wide-ranging animosity towards Daeron the Good, even with the Blackfyre Rebellion. Okay, so, and before someone says it, yes, I know this is television show continuity and has no bearing on the books, that's fair, but I was curious if it was George's intention to try and go back to link it all together in the books and maybe do a reprint of The World of Ice and Fire or a re-edition. Again, I hope to speak more on this topic when the season ends, and we'll try and get Elio on for that. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and whip it out for Harambe. You know, all the good stuff. And let me know what you thought of the episode down below. Also, don't forget, new episode of Night of the Seven Kingdom comes out Friday instead of the usual Sunday. For those of you wondering if it's because of the Super Bowl, actually no. President Donald Trump plans on making a State of the Union address again on Sunday, in which he will also audibly shit his pants. Again. Only this time Ira Parker will be the one directing the whole thing. So be sure to catch that. But again, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.